As the Illinois Channel approaches its 10th anniversary, we open our archives on our coverage of some of Illinois' memorable personalities. Next, from 2005, we hear former Congressman and Republican House Leader Bob Michels discuss his congressional career that lasted 48 years. This runs about 45 minutes.
Bob Michel, former Republican Congressman from the Peoria area and former leader of the House Republicans and the House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you.
A lot of Illinoisans and others around the country remember you as the Republican leader in the House of Representatives. What are you doing these days?
Well, you're in my office now at Hogan & Hartson, the largest law firm in Washington, and since I left the Congress, I didn't know for sure what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to come home or be out here in Washington, and I guess part of the decision was my wife's at the time. She liked always, well, she was very responsible for helping to bring opera and the cultural things, the ballet and stuff to Peoria, and of course, we have a version of all that, but it's a bit higher scale in Washington at the Kennedy Center, and that may have been one of the considerations. She said, "Boy, Bob, I've done so much volunteer work, I'm about worn out, you know." And then I really thought, frankly, when I left the Congress, that I would only be, I only said I would come down half-time, and I thought we would be doing some traveling, and because she was a good traveler when we went on congressional groups or whatever. And then I was on several corporate boards, and so I wasn't really given to spending that much time so-called back at the office, you know. But then since she passed away now nearly 2 years ago, and it's been a complete change of life for me, 55 years of wonderful marriage and 4 great kids, and the family, that was the center blocks of our whole existence around here. And when she passed away, well, I decided, gee, I just had to keep busy and doing things and keep active, and so I'm down here every day, and then I'm now on several presidential commissions, one on federal election reform and another one that has just been established, but I've been sworn in, but we haven't met yet, and it has to do with an amendment on the foreign aid bill and I think C. Boyd and Great is going to chair it, to look into what we're doing abroad in our foreign spending. Billions of dollars. Are we getting our best bang for the buck? Are we doing the right things or not? So that'll be kind of an interesting commission to serve on, although I told them I hope you can keep the travel to a minimum. As I get older, I'm not all that anxious to do it anymore, although if the facilities are comfortable enough, well, I can handle it.
One of the issues that we frequently hear about is the level of animosity in Congress these days.
Yes.
I'd like to get your reaction to one theory that says that this is a legacy of divisions caused by 3 things: the Vietnam War, the Watergate impeachment, and the Roe v. Wade abortion decision from 1971. What are your thoughts? Does this make sense, or do you think there are other reasons why Congress is so divisive these days?
Well, I tell you, it's a combination of things, there's no question about that. As a matter of fact, I should tell you that recently a couple members, Tim Johnson from Illinois and a gentleman on the Democratic side from Connecticut, and they want to see what they can do about going back to the old days when Tom Foley and I were leaders and had a good relationship. Tip O'Neill and I had a good relationship, and with everyone, it was just a different place. And your questions suggest, of course, that it has deteriorated and become a real firestorm around here. Most every issue that comes up, and as I see it, several things. In the old days, you spent more time in Washington. As a matter of fact, when I was first elected to Congress, we were only reimbursed for 1 trip per session from Peoria or your own district to Illinois. Well, of course, it got to be expensive to go back home. As a matter of fact, they tell always people like to hear the story about when Dan Rostenkowski from Chicago and Phil Crane and Harold Collier and I used to get in a station wagon on Thursday night and drive all night to get back to Illinois, and then come back the next week. And the reason was it was cheaper to drive and multiple than it was to fly. Although I think, if I remember correctly, the folks back home might not appreciate that, except that Ozark Airlines was serving Peoria at the time. I think our fare was $47 back, which wasn't all that bad. But nevertheless, they added up, if you wanted to get home. And Corinne and I decided after we had our children that because the schools were so inferior, let me say, here in the district and nearby Virginia and Maryland than they were at home. We have a very fine public school system, and we wanted our kids to be raised in Peoria, which we did. I'm kind of getting far afield of your question, but part of this is that in the old days when you maybe moved your family to Washington and kids would go to school here one semester, maybe back home another. I know one of the most critical questions that my wife was asked when she was giving an orientation for the new members: what do you do with the children? How do you handle that? What's your family life like? Well, of course, if you're estranged from your family for extended periods of time, it's going to have, in some cases, disastrous results. You have to really work at it to keep it pulled together. And here we were in our family, for example, with Corinne, and having 4 children under 4, and oh man, she was just a jewel in everything she did, and how she spent so much time with the children that I couldn't. As a matter of fact, one of my most embarrassing moments at one time when one of the wives came up to me and said, "We had a very interesting orientation by your wife," but it was a little troubling because she said that the boys' coaches spent more time with them than you did, meaning me. Boy, that cuts you right here in the heart. But the truth of the matter was, the boys were good athletes, and 2 hours practice 5 nights a week, and game time on Saturday, whether it was football, baseball, basketball. They didn't talk about Lori of the participating in athletics, but she was very involved in extracurricular activities. But it was true. Well, because when you were here, and then when you got home, you had political things you had to do, and you just weren't there. So that's part of that. As a matter of fact, in the old days, there used to be a number of lawyers in the Congress from New York and Philadelphia when the population centers were more here than they are now, south and out west. We used to call it the T&T Club, in Tuesday and out Thursday. They made their money practicing law as lawyers, and then this was an avocation to serve in the Congress, not a real position. Now it's become kind of a national T&T. If you look at the schedule, there'll be no votes on Monday, and we'll have them between Tuesday and Thursday. And then the problem is that because of the frequency of airline travel and the easiness with which you can go back home, except for California and Hawaii and Alaska, come back for every kind of function that's going on for the member, that they're just away so much. Another thing, electronic voting in the Congress. And in the old days, you had to be on the floor of the House to hear the debate, to know how you were going to vote on amendments. Now it's all by C-SPAN and electronic coverage. You can sit in your office and watch the monitor, on the arguments, and be signing letters and doing things. And then when they call the roll, yes, you can go over and vote. But when you spent more time on the floor, as we did in the old days, there were dead times. You know, speeches sometimes are very dull. Let's face it, they weren't all electrified. Very few of them, as a matter of fact. So you would get to visit with the members and go over on the other side of the aisle. And so you really got to know a member. There are some, I'm sorry to say, there are members today, even in the individual parties of both Republican and Democrat, of the senior members not knowing who the freshman members and sophomore members are. Now, when I was first a junior member of the Appropriation Committee 100 years ago, the old chairman from Missouri, really, I was about my third term before he really knew me by name, you know, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Michel, that was that of course that's a problem. Of course, as a leader, you always you couldn't be a good leader unless you knew everybody on your side and how they voted, what their district was like, and all that sort of thing. But then there's another event too. When I left the Congress and Newt succeeded me as leader, we were 40 votes behind, and I didn't think we were going to be able to pick up 40 seats. And, well, why do I have to serve 40 years? 38 might be enough, and I can bow out. And but Newt then dreamed up this contract for America, which really, in effect, nationalized the individual House campaign races. And so it was a national campaign to throw out the Democrats after 40 years of rule and vote in Republicans. And lo and behold, we picked up 52 seats had I decided to run again. Well, of course, I would have been a candidate for Speaker, but just didn't think that was in the cards at all. Newt's personality is obviously somewhat different than mine. He always prides himself, or we'd kid about today, we're best of friends, when he was a backbencher and lobbing grenades up to the front rows in the leadership, you know, and causing me problems along with some of the more junior members. But in that class that came in when we won 52 were a number of young Republican members, conservative by nature, who frankly ran against government. I mean, their whole idea was, we're going to Washington, but Washington either needs to be changed drastically, or we don't need this, we don't need that. And as distinguished from coming in a constructive way to say, listen, government's here to stay, let's see what we can do to improve it. And so here this group came into the Congress as young Turks, and they're in the majority right off the bat. And here I was in the Congress, 38 years, always as a member of the minority party. I never chaired anything, you know, and it was, even though I was leader, until about the last day when Tom Foley called me up one day and says, Bob, I think after all these years you're entitled to have the gavel and call the House to order. It was a very emotional kind of moment for me. But then coming in as the majority for these junior members, why, they get a little heady. And they don't know what it is to compromise. We got the majority, we're going to run things. And there's no question that more senior members, some of them, particularly Newt, hey, we were in the minority for so long, now we're really going to run things our way, and the heck with the rest of you, we're going to do it our way. And several times I'd go to Newt and I'd say, Newt, you know, remember the old days when Sam Rayburn was the speaker from Texas and Joe Martin from Massachusetts was the minority leader? They changed places a couple times. Well, and under those circumstances, you had a respect for the other side, because if your side lost the election last time, you were going to be in the minority, not be the speaker, but the minority leader. And there was a greater respect in those days for the fact that you might change seats. So, but Newt's attitude was, they're our enemy. And I would always say, well, they're not our enemy, Newt. They're our political adversaries. And you'd probably be best advised to treat them with some respect, because you may be in the minority someday. Well, of course, he didn't. He resigned before that ever happened.
Well, you touched a little bit on this about Newt Gingrich, but there's another theory on House leadership that political scientists like to debate. You are known as being very friendly, while Newt Gingrich, who replaced you as Republican leader, was far more aggressive in his relationship with the Democrats.
Right.
And yet, under your leadership and that of Gerald Ford, the House Republicans were 40 years in the wilderness.
Right.
In retrospect, do you think Speaker Gingrich's style was a determining factor in bringing about the rise of the Republican majority and therefore the right strategy for Republicans?
Well, there's no question but that at that time, after 40 years, there were people who'd say, gee whiz, that's a long time for them to be in power. And some of the committee chairmen were getting very autocratic, which has led, incidentally, to the term limits on committee chairmen. Now, some members, some thought, well, we ought to have term limits for members of Congress. I always thought that was a crazy idea because it took you several terms to get your feet wet and to find out how this place works and all the rest of the things. So I never supported term limits for an individual. But when I was leader and we were looking for some change in this thing, I said, well, I'll tell you, part of the problem is the autocratic committee chairmen who've been in the for so long that, they just wield a heavy gavel and weren't giving due respect to the minority or even the witnesses sometimes that came before the committees. And so I thought one of the antidotes to that would be maybe a term limit of 3 terms as chairman, and then you have to give way to whatever your party caucus determines the replacement ought to be. In my case, I would have always operated by seniority, and then if the person who gravitated toward the top was unacceptable to the caucus, well, then you'd move to the second or third person down the line. So, the times were such that they were due for a change. I'm not going to deny that the strategy of that Contract for America, nationalizing the campaign, that time worked. Now, Tip O'Neill was always one who was noted for the expression, all politics is local. And you find many people condemning the Congress, but praising their own congressman, because they get to know him. He's close enough to him. And but the Congress as an institution, well, they didn't like it for whatever reason, And there's no question this aggressiveness has led to more, well, what shall I say, just acrimonious exchanges on the floor, which are frankly unacceptable. Because when we refer under the rules of the House to the gentle lady or the gentleman from Mississippi or Arkansas, and we are always cautioned, or of course we as leaders were always cautioning our younger members, always follow the rules and a high state of decorum, because it is the highest legislative body in the land. People look to it, hopefully respect it. And that means you've got to play the part and the role, and particularly in a democracy when we're trying to spread it throughout the globe, that if there are 2 major parties, in many countries there are multiple parties, which leads to kind of the situation as you have where you have a prime minister, like in Britain, but. I don't know what the overall answer to it is, because you really can't change some of the personalities that are currently there. But that group I told you that was now forming a middle aisle caucus now has 33 members, or 34, I think 16 or 17 from each party. Now maybe something will come of that, in time. And we'll see how these Supreme Court nominees fare, how the debate flows. Of course, that's over in the Senate side, but it'll have national implications, and hopefully it'll be a wholesome debate and one that will bring credit on the Senate and maybe restore some of the people's confidence in the fact that, yes, these people do have serious differences, but they're gentlemen and gentle women in their resolving those differences.
As an institution, Congress has changed in many ways since you were first elected. In the 1950s, train travel was the norm and members would stay in Washington over the weekends. Often they would socialize together. Now they fly in and out, and when they are home, they have to hold office hours, walk in parades, and give speeches. It leaves little time with their families or just to walk around their districts. Over your 46 years as a member of Congress, you served in the House under both cultures. What are your thoughts on how Congress operates?
Well, as we've been saying, it's gotten to be pretty bitter at times, and the exchanges when, for example, the mechanics in the House, for example, if a member goes beyond what's good, respectable language for an opponent, a member is obliged or has the authority to rise and say, Mr. Speaker, I demand the gentleman's words be taken down, which means that everything stops and the clerk of the House reads, or the one taking the transcription reads the words that were said at that time, and then there could be even a vote of the House as to whether or not it's acceptable or is not acceptable, whether the gentlewoman or lady asks unanimous consent to withdraw their remarks so they'd be expunged from the record. Now that's when in the extreme, of course. And so I think the institutions work much better when there's a cordial relationship between the two parties, and then there's when you're in the majority, and my party now is in the majority, and several times I've winced at a few things that have taken place when, for example, the Speaker, my dear friend Denny Hastert, left the vote open for 3.5 hours to get one vote for the passage of prescription drugs, I think it was, in the Medicare bill. I remember when Jim Wright, the Speaker, Democratic Speaker, held the vote open for a half an hour on I think it was the Iran-Contra issue in Central America, and I was livid, because I thought we had the vote won, and he left the vote open for a half an hour to corral enough votes to beat me. Then what comes around goes around, or goes around comes around. And I was very distressed when we were guilty of doing the same thing. My party when it had the majority. So there are some of those things you've got to be very careful about, conscious about, and to always have a respect for the minority point of view, because it's a debating society, no question about it. The Senate's supposed to be the most deliberative body ever, and the House, we limit members usually to 5 minutes, or you can ask for an extension or more, depending upon whether or not you're managing the bill or not. But you should always have respect for the minority point of view, and even in the rules, to the degree that while you've got the majority and you'd like to have it your way, to give the minority that opportunity to present and make the arguments. Of course, now that we're electrified, or at least electronic coverage of the House and Senate, why the members would like to have those arguments on the record for display back home for their constituents, so they know that they weren't just standing or sitting there mute, that they were trying to participate in the debate, but were foreclosed by an autocratic, non-yielding majority. So it can come back to haunt you, and you have to should be careful and conscious of that at all times when you're a leader. Of course, a leader's got to be a good listener too all the time to be a good leader.
Another major change while you served was the development of C-SPAN televising the House, beginning in 1979. Mm-hmm. The Illinois channel is a result of C-SPAN's formation. What are your thoughts on televising government proceedings? Is this a good thing, or does it damage the decorum and affect the quality of debate?
Well, at first I opposed it because I thought there was going to be too much showboating, and people would hog the camera and one thing and another. As a matter of fact, one time, then they start bringing bringing props into the on the floor of the House, you know, and I was a little disturbed at that until one time one member took a brown paper bag over his head, and I forget what the issue was, but it was you know, it was very unseemly, and I thought it was disrespectful to the House of Representatives, so I called a member on it. And in the caucus, I said, no more of that while I'm leader, or I'll just deny the privilege of the floor, because you should, you know, have a high state of decorum. And but my fear that there'd be people. Well, at one time, Tip O'Neill was so exercised, and rightly so, and it was Newt who had what we call special orders. You know, get some time at the end of the legislative day. You can ask for an hour, and then as other members ask for an additional hour, and have a discussion. And supposedly, well, we're going to talk all night on the issue of such and such, and so that the people in California, you know, whether they're staying up late at night, they'll still be able to see this debate on the floor of the House. The problem was when it was only on our side of the aisle and our members were talking with one another, and then several of them on occasion said, and why is it that no one on the other side of the aisle rises to object or to make another point, you know? And there was nobody there. And Tip O'Neill one evening just got terribly exercised, came down on the floor and called him on it. And I think rightly so, because the unsuspecting audience out there thought, well, boy, they're giving a great old speech and hammering away on the other side, and nobody's responding to it. And so that was a practice that was, it was overdone, and they got called on it, and of course, changes were made, and rightly so. But I think overall, probably, it was a good thing to have happened, because now the American public, if they want to, can tune in and see the live, uncut, unaltered debate, you know, see it like it really is what they used to say is like legislating is like grinding up sausage, you know, it's a messy thing sometimes. So you see it in with all its unfavorable light, as well as favorable light, and I think it's been educational, and particularly then when you have C-SPAN or going to committee hearings that might not have been covered. It's a very important issue. And events like the president's funeral, you know, and things of that nature, where maybe the major networks wouldn't want to give total time to it, and or uncut, and have their high-powered commentators, you know, commenting and from time to time. So I say, you know, I changed my view, and my fears were allayed after we worked out the bugs, and of course, one of the other things was that if depending on who was managing the cameras, whether they would move around to different people. Now it's and I think it's a good principle. You just settle on the podium, and the person that's really been acknowledged to speak, that's what ought to be covered, not the antics going on, you know, that somebody might be sleeping or reading a newspaper, and stuff of that kind that would be demeaning to either the House or Senate chamber.
Former Senator Howard Baker once said half-jokingly that air conditioning ruined Congress because members had to adjourn and go home during the summers. If you could change one thing to improve how Congress operates, what would it be?
Well, and the joke and the point was that in the early days when I first came to Washington, we didn't have air conditioning. Oh man, was it hot! And as a matter of fact, my Corinne and I, we shared a third walk-up apartment with my predecessor, the former member of Congress, who was only being paid $20 $12,500 in those days. And so, you know, a member of Congress was trying, and he was raising a couple children back home in Pekin, Illinois, and you try to save expenses, you know. But, and in summertime, it was hotter than the hinges of you know what. And because there was no air conditioning, of course, in the old days, and the Congress, when it got too hot, well, they blew out of town, you know, and that's what Howard was referring to. Well, the Congress is just meeting too doggone long, you know, year long. Better that they get out of town for, because there's no air conditioning or something like that. But if I could change one thing, but it's impossible to do. And that's because goes back to what we were originally talking about, the attitude or the animosity that has grown up in the Congress. That if I could wave a magic wand and say, Denny, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that you and Nancy Pelosi could be the best of friends and treat each other with utmost respect, and the other leaders, and Tom DeLay, you and your counterpart over there, and in the Senate, where it isn't as bad as in the House. They've always had a little different culture over there in the Senate. It's kind of like a club sometimes, you know.
Your service to the nation began long before Congress. You were a rifleman in the Army during World War II. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, you were shot in the right hand at one point, and you captured 28 Germans without firing a single shot. Tell us a bit about those experiences and how they affected your life direction.
Oh, well, of course, there's no question but that with the issue of war and peace and defense and having once served in the military, there's no question about it. It influenced my whole life. It influenced my life in the Congress because I was once a combat soldier and knew what it was like. I always served in the enlisted ranks during World War II, and so as a matter of fact, when we had the debate on the Gulf War, and I co-sponsored the resolution with Mr. Solars from New York to authorize the first President Bush to use ground troops in the Kuwaiti War to kick Saddam Hussein out of the Iraqi president out of Kuwait. And we had a very spirited bipartisan debate. Tom Foley was going to wrap it up for the majority. I was wrapping it up for the minority. And I told Tom, I said, well, this is a very emotional debate for me, and we're worthy opponents here. And of course, I think my cause is right. That's why I'm arguing my side, and I respect you for taking the view that you want more time, et cetera, et cetera. But I said, one of the things that really distresses me is that when I was during World War II, I was always given the following orders because I was in the enlisted ranks. Now, here I am in the highest legislative body of the land and about to authorize legislation that would send another generation of young men and women to war, where I never had a call before, and now I'm helping to make that call. I don't take that decision lightly. It's a life and death decision, and I anguished over that, but I went through the arguments, and the first President Bush was right. I mean, it was an incursion on a foreign land that we wanted to nip in the bud. We had an obligation to do it. That was our world responsibility. We felt it so. Some people didn't think so, but we did. And thank heavens we've been as dominant as we have been to in these matters of between war and peace. In the war, I had my share of combat, no question about it, and I was a grunt, a dog face, and I tell you, hedgerows, and some of the things you never got really trained for. In my basic training in infantry, we weren't up against hedgerows that you found in France after you were there, and boy, that's a different kind of fighting. I tell you, about every quarter of a mile or so, the little French plots, had these hedgerows, and of course they were great for defense for the Jerry's when you're behind a hedgerow, but when you're trying to move on offense, it's very tough going. Then the ingenuity of some of our people sometimes, the combat engineers developed kind of a scoop thing that they welded to the front of tanks. Finally, after finding, boy, even the tanks couldn't get through these barriers, to help you with any meaningful firepower other than your M1 rifle or a 30 caliber machine gun. And so it was a welded kind of thing today, like we call them backhoes or whatever today in our regular construction work, and they'd take these tanks and just run up against it to try and break through, to make a path through, so that, of course, then the Jerry's also knew they could focus in on that opening. You couldn't just all of a sudden run through there and without using artillery or mortars or something on the opposition to silence those who could just cut you to pieces. So that was something that we hadn't planned for, but that we learned to cope with. Pillboxes, we had some training in that, and satchel charges and TNT blocks, and then when at St. Lo, where we were stymied there for a long time, and a lot of people, well, it wasn't known for some time later that our own Air Force killed so many of our own soldiers with short airdrops. As a matter of fact, General McNair, a 4-star general, was up on the front, trying to observe matters, and he was 60 fellows from my sister regiment to our right were killed in a short drop. What happened, Ike, and even these very smart generals, Ike and all the rest, thought that what they would do, they would send out, as they did, oh man, they pulverized St. Lo. I thought, man, oh man, how could anybody withstand that? And yet when we got on the move, they came out of the woodwork, which always taught me one thing: you can bomb them to smithereens, but they're still going to be there. And the infantry, it takes the infantry. You can't win a war by air alone. You got to have the old infantry go and root them out. But in that short drop, he was using strategic bombers, 17s and B-24s, the big ones that went over and bombed Leipzig and Berlin and all the rest, on a perpendicular line, just coming like this and say, the enemy's there and we're here, drop your bombs here. Well, and they were guided by smoke pots that we had. Well, when the wind blows the wrong way with a smoke pot, the Air Force couldn't tell, where that led. Then after that, a frontline infantryman, we had rolled out fluorescent things about 4 feet wide, and they rolled out. And when we called back for air support for fighter 9th Air Force to come in, maybe P-47s to take out a tough position or something, we'd roll out this fluorescent thing so that they could tell that, hey, we're here and the enemy's there. Don't drop your stuff here. But things of that nature that you really had, that even the top generals had to learn. After that, Ike always said, we're never bombing on a perpendicular line. We'll always go up laterally. In other words, we know here's the line and there's the enemy, and here's our folks, and we'll bomb on this side. But so there were those, and then of course in the battle, then when we got through there, and then we went up to Belgium, we missed Paris. Another couple divisions were asked to go to march down the Marseillaise, which is Champs-Élysées, and singing the Marseillaise. But and then we went across the Moose River into Belgium, and we liberated Liège, and then we turned south into the Siegfried Line just south of Aachen, AACHEN, and the Siegfried Line with the old tank traps, and all the rest, and that was tough going. And then, of course, the Battle of the Bulge. We were on the northern hinge. Everybody thinks the Battle of the Bulge was all around Bastogne. Well, it's true. The 101st Airborne not got held there, but this salient that went, it was a pointed thing that went up. There was a south part of that, and on the northern hinge. We were on the north, but everybody always thought because of Bastogne and General, I forget his name, who, when it was asked to surrender, he said, "Oh, nuts," and that's made always so much publicity about that. And then, of course, Patton was down there in the south, too. And I always wondered why, strategically, they didn't try or didn't have Patton move to try and cut off the doggone point, and take some more a batch of prisoners like we did down in France when we broke through. We circled around, it was called the Fillet Trap, and we joined the British, and I forget how many 100,000 Jerrys were in that, that were taken prisoner there. Well, otherwise they were out of commission. But the powers to be at the time of the Battle of the Bulge, after the point, then they decided they wanted to even up the line. And boy, that was a costly thing in the Hurtgen Forest. Man, when you go through forest area and the 88ths come in, and as an infantryman, you live in a foxhole, and supposedly down below ground level to protect you. But in a forest area with tree bursts that hit the trees up here, and then you got to build a top to your foxhole, and you couldn't do that unless you had some limbs and stuff, and then took your old shovel and put ground over it, So it was a different kind of a war again, and. Boy, you learn by experience, and oh man, I tell you, it was so cold. I froze my, you-know-what. I had two pairs of long johns, 2 pairs of woolen pants, and a pair of snow pants, and I was still just freezing because you're living right in the old ground, and those are tough times.
Congressman Michel, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on the Illinois Channel and share your insights. Thank you very much.
Enjoyable. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. If you have any comments or questions on our programming, please email us at illinoischannel@aol.com. Or if you have any questions about the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.